Hey people, how are you all? Today I'm kind of doing a video that's a bit of a precursor to plans I have for next month, which is of course Pride Month, in that I'm talking about queer characters, which I suppose I always do, but specifically one queer character here. But this time it's a queer character that I happen to have already drawn and finished, and I figured I would post it now instead of waiting the additional 5 or 6 days it's going to take for it to be in June. So yeah. I don't know how many of you have watched or seen Shadowhunters before, or alternatively read any of the Mortal Instrument books. I would not be entirely surprised if you haven't, given that that particular genre of YA fantasy isn't something I've drawn much on my channel before, and in fact there is only one drawing of any of the characters from this universe on my entire Instagram account, and that drawing's 5 years old and done in pencil crayon. I only really even came back to this series on a whim because I was looking through the Illustrated History of Shadowhunters book, which is obviously once again written by Cassandra Clare, but illustrated by Cassandra Jean, and I was looking at it for portrait inspiration because the way the character portraits are done there are very beautiful. I feel like somewhere along the road though, I kind of grew out of these books a little. In a way, I suppose it was inevitable because the book series is about teenage characters who act like adults most of the time, and I'm a person who is no longer a teenager, but still doesn't feel as old or put together as about half the characters described here. The TV show, I believe, does shift the character ages upwards a little bit, mostly to make up for the fact that all the actors were obviously adults, but even then the main character, Clary Fairchild, is still 18 and seems to have a much more grown up and put together mindset than I did back then, possibly even more than I do have now. I'm 20, by the way, for reference. All this is to say that I had kind of forgotten about this series. I tucked it away in the background of my mind and forgotten why it meant so much to me the first time around. You see, the character I'm drawing today is the warlock from the series known as Magnus Bane, and he was the first bisexual character I had ever come across anywhere. In fact, I think he might possibly be the first queer character, full stop, that I had ever discovered in any kind of media. I certainly can't remember one from before then. I presume there must have been a side character maybe in something, but I don't think I'd even watched Friends by this point, which obviously, I mean, Ross's ex-wife, who only appears like a little bit in the first season, is gay, but I'd never come across any. And yeah, people who have read the books or seen the show are going to be thinking, wait a second. What about Alec? Because he obviously appears in the books first. However, I actually read the Bane Chronicles, the spin-off novel, long before I ever touched the series, so that is why. I honestly can't remember who bought the Bane Chronicles for me. I think it might have been my parents, possibly my grandma, or one of my grandparents. But whoever it was, I am almost certain that they did not know what it was. They just thought, hey, here's a little fantasy novel. Kate loves fantasy novels. Let's get at this. It looks good. It's got warlock. Sure, should be fine. And let me tell you, I latched onto that book like a leech once I started reading. Which is unusual in and of itself, given the book isn't one consistent narrative, but 11 short stories throughout Magnus's history, not even in chronological order. And I really should have got bored partway through, because I like consistent narratives that show character development over time, and when you're jumping all over the place, it's hard to keep track of that. But something about the character fascinated me, and I couldn't let go of it. And no, if you're wondering, I was very much not aware that I was bi or ace back then. I just thought it was such an interesting idea to write about a character who was attracted to both men and women, and whilst I was technically aware that queer people existed in the world, it had never really occurred to me that that was something that would appear in books. I'm not even sure how aware I was that bisexuals existed as a concept. I mean, the idea made sense in and of itself. If gay people exist and straight people exist, then there's probably something in between where people like members of both genders. But I hadn't ever seen it before. Not really. I also just loved how confident and sure of himself this character was, and how proud he was of himself and who he decided to be. I mean, 14-year-old me might not have known she was queer, but I damn well knew I did not fit in, and the idea of just taking that in my stride and being confident with it was kind of incredible. Even if, you know, 6 years later, I've still not quite managed that. One day I'll be a fabulous, eccentric personality with, you know, whimsy and wit. You never know. We'll get there. We're working there slowly. I didn't know at the time that was why I love the book so much. I just knew that I did love it. And so I reread it about 100 times. And then one day I overheard my friends talking about some show or other at school that I had, like most other shows that they watched, never seen before, when somebody mentioned the name Magnus. And so I asked what it was about. And I started to realise just how tiny the corner of this universe I was currently inhabiting was. And so I started watching the show and also bought all 6 books from the main series. I used to be a lot better at reading than I currently am. I'm trying my best to get back into the habit of reading actual books. It's a slow process, but I am getting there. But back then, you know, the idea of buying 6 books in a series was like, oh, well, we've done it in about a month, I'm gonna whiz through these. As with many adaptations, of course, the show is almost nothing like the books. And only just about hits most of the major plot points, to be honest. They're very different entities, although they follow the same basic outline of who's related to who and who becomes which kind of downworlder at different points in the story. Although, like I said, all the characters are slightly older on the show, which, to be honest, is probably a good thing because it makes Magnus and Alec's relationship a whole lot less uncomfortable, as Alec is, you know, older than 17 here. Which is one of the few issues I've got with the books, to be honest. I read all the books on a big road trip we did for my dad's 50th, and I'll be perfectly honest, I don't remember tons of what happened in them. I have a rough idea which characters survived to the end and who got with who, but I don't remember masses. The show, on the other hand, I have much better memory of, because the last season only came out in 2018. Which, now that I think about it, was 4 years ago. Oh my god, that's a long time ago. Okay, I thought it was more recent than that. I'm getting old. Anyway, I've been rewatching the show in the last couple of weeks, so I am more up to date on that. Although I'm beginning to realise that I don't actually recall almost anything of what happened in season 3 or 4. I remember watching them when they first came out, but I don't really remember much of what happened, so I must never have rewatched them. But I'm really enjoying it. Yes, I couldn't care less about the main pairing in the show and their very complicated family history. Clary and Jace are lovely characters individually, but I don't really care about them together or not. But I do really love the focus that they put on developing Clary's relationships with all of the characters, not just Jace. And, of course, getting to see Malik on screen. Magnus and Alec are given just as much, if not slightly more, focus than all the other side relationships on the show, and they're actually allowed to show affection, like hello and goodbye kisses and hugs, and are like, they're actually the longest running relationship in the entire show if we exclude the very temporary breakup they have at the end of season 2. I mean, you all know that I went through a little phase where I was very obsessed with Torchwood and constantly frustrated at the lack of respect with which Jack and Yanto's relationship was handled. The writers never seemed to decide whether they actually wanted them to be together or not. But somehow I didn't realise the entire time I was watching that show that Magnus and Alec have such a similar dynamic. Although Magnus is possibly less of a bi stereotype than Jack, I think. He's outgoing, but he's certainly not overly promiscuous, which is good. But here, Magnus and Alec get treated the way that the relationship deserves, and it's kind of amazing. Additionally, I noticed something in this watch-through that I hadn't properly clocked before, which is that this series also has a canonical ace character, one Rafael Santiago, who not only clearly explains that his aceness is not at all related to him becoming a vampire, that he's always been this way, it's part of who he is, but his one relationship in the show does end, but it ends for completely separate reasons. His love interest clearly states that she doesn't care about sex if that's not something he wants. She just genuinely cares about him as a person. And I think the first time I watched this, I was just a little bit confused because no one had ever really explained to me that ace people exist, basically. And you know, Raphael is kind of an arse, so his character isn't somebody I was massively attached to. He's certainly an interesting, well-written character, but he was never one of my favourites. But now watching this back, and I can see how well-informed and thought out these scenes were, and they actually mean a lot to me. As do many of the Malik scenes, to be honest. In fact, I have a really vivid memory of being at a friend's house when, I must have been about 15, and we were at a sleepover, and there were a whole load of us, and I'd completely run out of social energy. My emotional battery was dead, and I was feeling really left out, because everyone else seemed fine, and kind of down about it. And I specifically got my phone out, put my headphones in, and I searched for the Malik kiss from the end of episode 12 in season 1, and I rewatched that scene because I knew it would make me feel better, and it made me smile, and it made me feel like the world might be okay, and it made me happy when I was feeling like I didn't really matter, and if I wasn't there, nobody would notice. It's really important. I still obviously have plenty of issues with this series and the books that I could probably nitpick apart all the bits that seem off or don't work for ages. That's not to say they're not excellent books, they are very well written, the world building is fantastic. I do just question some of the age limits of the characters, the random places characters decide to sleep together that make very little sense, and obviously the whole weird incest baiting, is that a thing? I'm not sure. Technically, it's all fine and nobody is in a relationship with their actual sibling at any point, but it's a little bit odd. It's never going to be my favourite series, you know, there are things out there that are better, particularly in terms of queer representation, that have a wider, more diverse range of it, but they are still really, really important to me. Magnus Bane as a character is really important to me because until him, I didn't know that who I now know I am was even a way that a person could be. And so I wanted to draw something to help recognise that. I tried to blend together the character from the books and the version portrayed by Harry Shum Jr. in the show, especially taking outfit inspiration from the show aesthetic. Although, once I saw it mentioned in the book, I kind of had to put him in a fishnet top. The original plan was to start like a book cover. I think realistically it came out looking more like some kind of tarot card, and I may have lost the subtlety I was kind of going for with using the bi-flag colours as a colour palette. But oh well, it's nearly June anyway, it's fine. So yeah, here's to what wasn't quite my queer awakening, but what was about as close as I think I ever got. Here's to writing characters who are brilliant and open and confident in who they are, who won't let ignorant, closed-minded people change them. Here's to putting more representation in the media. I mean, always more, we can never have enough. So, you know, hopefully in the future, kids don't wait till they're 14 before they've ever seen a person like them appear in any book or series, particularly fantasy and adventure series. I mentioned this in my Our Flag Means Death video, but I swear, even now, the vast majority of media with queer characters in is like modern world realism. It's not fantasy and adventure and the kind of otherworldliness that kids who don't fit in tend to latch onto. One of the reasons I loved reading fantasy was I adored the idea of stepping through a wardrobe into Narnia where all my problems would go away and people would accept me for who I was. And yet, weirdly, all of the media that's designed for people who are different, queer media, is set in the modern world, and no offense, but the modern world kinda sucks. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. This is obviously something that is important to me. It's something I'm very nostalgic about and have been for a long time, and I'm always going to hold close to my heart. So thanks for listening to me ramble about it for, oh my god, 15 minutes. Okay, we might need to trim this video down in the editing. But thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I will be back soon. Probably whenever I finally get around to recording my Foundation end of year video, but I cannot be asked with that right now because it requires so much more editing than Speedpaint. But yeah, see you soon. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Bye!